alive.
Everyone go in the comments and tell Robin she looks beautiful.
Okay, so welcome. We have now reached a point that my bookmark is not at because I wasn't the last one reading.
They had paused on Moria, or on the steps in Moria, and they had like a little snack. And that's where we were.
Check.
All right. I have two possibilities for things that I could do today while I'm not reading. I have a sock and I have my coloring app on my phone. Thoughts?
I am always in favor of getting shit done, like made when that's an option. But if you're feeling more like you need a little chill time rather than productivity time, then go for the coloring.
I don't really think of knitting as productivity time, to be honest. I might get bored though.
Before.
Yes, no, I know, but I just don't think of it as productivity. Well, I'll start with the sock, and then if I get bored, the thing is, like, I don't feel super inspired to make this sock. I just don't have anything else going right now, you know?
Yeah.
I was going to start a new project, but instead I made toast.
Toast is important.
Mm-hmm.
Toast could be said to be a project, just a very short-term one with instant gratification involved.
I just knew I would be starving by 1 if I didn't. So.
Right. Words. Ooh, we should let people know that we're on. I shall post to the evil book of faces. Is there a different app we can move to? Seeing as how Zuckerberg is like pro-Trump and crap.
I mean, there's lots of apps. It just depends on what you want to do, but also a lot of the people that are on Facebook you may not find there.
Right? It took me ages to collect all my friends from elementary school and stuff.
Yep. I don't really use Facebook anymore, honestly. Like, I don't check it. I'm not on there.
I've noticed that. Oh, I don't know what this channel is. Should I just give them the link that's here, or is that my link?
That's your link. Don't give them that. You can just go to our YouTube channel and pull the live link.
Do a long expected podcast. Post. There we go. I hope they come and comment because that would be fun. So my brother left for a couple of days, and then he'll be back Tuesday for a few days, and then he'll leave for a few days. And that seems to be another thing that I can blame my genes on, because that's exactly how I like to travel. Like, now I have a days, and I'm going to go do this and that and stuff and not hold still for very long, because then I feel like I'm wearing out my welcome. Which
all these things you never knew were genetic.
Right? It's freaky. Is there even any me that doesn't come from one side of the family or the other?
I don't know, dude. Is there?
I don't know. It's all genetic, which means I don't have any free will, which is sad, but it also means I don't have to take the blame for any of my quirks. So that's okay. There is a silver lining. Like, ready?
Ready.
The road may wind much. Is that where we left off?
We were right at the end of of that section. because it was like, oh, it's going to be like 40 miles. Don't drink all your water. The road may wind much. However, that like chunk ended.
After only a brief rest, they started on their way again. All were eager to get the journey over as quickly as possible and were willing, tired as they were, to go on marching still for several hours. Gandalf walked in front as before. In his left hand he held up his glimmering staff, the light of which just showed the ground before his feet. In his right he held his sword, Glamdring. Behind him came Gimli, his eyes glinting in the dim light as he turned his head from side to side. Behind the dwarf walked Frodo, and he had drawn the short sword Sting. No gleam came from the blades of Sting or of Glamdring, and that was some comfort, for being the work of elvish smiths in the elder days, these swords shone with a cold light if any orcs were near at hand. Behind Frodo went Sam. Useful, really useful.
Mm-hmm.
We could all use some of that.
Swords that shine with a cold light when orcs are at hand. I can't say that I've ever had a hands-on need for that.
Well, if you think of orcs not as a race or species, but as a mindset, knowing the people who have an orcish mindset because something you own starts glowing when they're nearby, that would be fucking useful.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah, never get mugged. Never get hard done by. And anyone who dates someone of an orcish disposition wouldn't have any excuse for it.
I keep dropping stitches.
I keep forgetting where I'm at.
They shone with a cold light when orcs were nearby.
I know. I just don't know where on the page that is.
Oh, that I can't help with.
Behind Frodo went Sam, and after him Legolas, and the young hobbits, and Boromir. In the dark at the rear, grim and silent, walked Aragorn.
Who has not said anything for like 20 pages because he's so pissed off.
Right? Come here! The passage twisted round a few turns and then began to descend. It went steadily down for a long while before it became level once again. The air grew hot and stifling, but it was not foul, and at times they felt currents of cooler air upon their faces, issuing from half-guessed openings in the walls. There were many of these. In the pale ray of the wizard's staff, Frodo caught glimpses of stairs and arches, and of other passages and tunnels sloping up or running steeply down, or opening blankly dark on either side. It was bewildering beyond hope of remembering. Gimli aided Gandalf very little, except by his stout courage. At least he was not, as were most of the others, troubled by the mere darkness in itself. Often the wizard consulted him at points where the choice of way was doubtful, but it was always Gandalf who had the final word. The mines of Moria were vast and intricate beyond the imagination of Gimli, Gloin's son, dwarf of the mountain race though he was. To Gandalf, the far-off memories of a journey long before were now of little help, but even in the gloom, and despite all windings of the road, he knew whither he wished to go, and he did not falter as long as there was a path that led towards his goal. "Do not be afraid," said Aragorn. There was a pause longer than usual, and Gandalf and Gimli were whispering together. The others were crowded behind, waiting anxiously. "Do not be afraid. I have been with him on many a journey, if never on one so dark. And there are tales in Rivendell of greater deeds of his than any that I have seen. He will not go astray, if there is any path to find. He has led us in here against our fears, but he will lead us out again at whatever cost to himself. He is surer of finding the way. He's surer of finding the way home in a blind night than the cats of Queen Beruthiel." So, that's a real thing. The cats of Queen Beruthiel. I figured it was like a fairy tale or something that they have in Middle Earth, but no,
Mhm.
everything's historical. She was the wife of the 12th king of Numenor, and she was really into cats, and she was from the south, and she turned out to be like batshit crazy. So,
Mhm.
um, as far as the history is concerned, she's just kind of sketched in. Like, she was caught trying to murder her husband and put in a boat and sent down the river and never seen again type of thing. But I'm sure that what got handed down in stories and stuff was a lot more detailed and
Yes, not necessarily more accurate, but more detailed.
exactly. And I'm sure the cats figure heavily in whatever stories they've all been told. I love that notion, though. I totally want to write a little children's book about the cats of Queen Beruthiel and how every time they tried to get rid of them.
But the cat came back the very next.
next day. See, it already exists. It writes itself. It was well for the company that they had such a guide. They had no fuel, nor any means of making torches. In the desperate scramble at the doors, many things had been left behind. But without any light, they would soon have come to grief. There were not only many roads to choose from, there were also, in many places, holes and pitfalls and dark wells beside the path in which their passing feet echoed. There were fissures and chasms in the walls and floor, and every now and then a crack would open right before their feet. The widest was more than 7 feet across, and it was long before Pippin could summon enough courage to leap over the dreadful gap. The noise of churning water came up from far below, as if some great mill wheel was turning in the depths.
I just like I am 5.5 feet tall, and I could not leap 7 feet. How in the hell did the hobbits leap 7 feet?
Well, one of their lesser known traits is the ability to.
I'm like, that would be the equivalent of us leaping like 15 feet.
Like, they're like fleas.
They're just video game characters that can double jump.
Wing, wing. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. Maybe there was the next thing was on a shorter level. So it was 7 feet this way. So he could do that. Other way around, I suppose.
I was gonna say downwards would be easy.
Downwards. I keep forgetting this isn't a mirror. Yeah, that's the only thing I can come up with. Because otherwise, yeah, that's you have the Harrison Ford landing on the ledge and going.
Or you just have like, okay, burn. It's me, Pippin.
It does sound kind of Italian. I don't. The more I read it, the more I picture it as a city rather than the way it was depicted in any movies or drawings. They tend to draw caves, big caves and small caves and tunnels, but not cities. And it's so much like the description is more like a city. Like there would be buildings and alleys, and it's not just a city on one level. It's a city that's built in 3 dimensions. Like
yeah, because he says like passageways and stairs, not like tunnels and caves.
Exactly. And it's and the big hallway with the big pillars looks useless in the movie, but in the book it sounds more like a public square, like Times Square but underground.
Yeah.
Like you would be able to see that that people lived there. And that would be so much more disturbing and kind of harrowing than the cave look, because it's a city. It would look like a post-apocalyptic movie only in pitch blackness, and that would I want to see that. I want to see that drawn or something, because
I was gonna say you should draw that because it sounds super cool.
Right? A lot more haunting and a lot more nerve-wracking.
Well, it also gives an additional element to Gimli's quote from the movie where he's like, "This is the kingdom of my cousin Balin, and they call it a mine."
Exactly. Yeah, they never made it look like a lived-in place, and it would have been more accurate and more terrifying if it had looked like it had been a lived-in place.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Thank you. Rope, muttered Sam. Pippin's just on that jump. I knew I'd want it if I hadn't got it. As these dangers became more frequent, their march became slower. And of course, if a city underground is falling apart, it would be like ruins. So they're parkouring through three-dimensional ruins of like New York.
Yeah.
That's a better picture. Anyway. As these dangers became more frequent, their march became slower. Already they seemed to have been tramping on endlessly to the mountain's roots. They were more than weary, and yet there seemed no comfort in the thought of halting anywhere. Frodo's spirits had risen for a while after his escape and after food and a draught of the cordial, but now a deep uneasiness, growing to dread, crept over him again. Though he had been healed in Rivendell of the knife's stroke, that grim wound had not been without effect. His senses were sharper and more aware of things that could not be seen. One sign of change that he soon had noticed was that he could see more in the dark than any of his companions, save perhaps Gandalf. And he was, in any case, the bearer of the ring. It hung upon its chain against his breast, and at whiles it seemed a heavy weight. He felt the certainty of evil ahead and of evil following. But he said nothing. He gripped tighter on the hilt of his sword and went on doggedly. The company behind him spoke seldom, and then only in hurried whispers. There was no sound but the sound of their own feet, the dull stump of Gimli's dwarf boots, the heavy tread of Boromir, the light step of Legolas, the soft, scarce-heard patter of hobbit feet, and in the rear the slow, firm footfalls of Aragorn with his long stride. When they halted for a moment, they heard nothing at all, unless it were occasionally a faint trickle and drip of unseen water. Yet Frodo began to hear, or to imagine that he heard, something else, like the faint fall of soft bare feet. It was never loud enough or near enough for him to feel certain that he heard it, but once it had started, it never stopped while the company was moving. But it was not an echo, for when they halted, it pattered on for a little all by itself, and then grew still. So Gollum escapes from the elves with the help of orcs. And did the orcs bring him here, or did they just be like, all right, we got you out of there, go do Dark Master's bidding? And he was like, I'll do that, but first I need a mountain over my head because I'm really fucking agoraphobic.
That's a good question. I would imagine that the orcs brought him either there or somewhere closer to Mirkwood, and he kind of made his way down under the mountain and through the mountain, you know?
Yeah.
And then was sort of, I mean, how aware is he and how drawn is he to the ring? Because maybe he was just like going along, being Gollum-y, being like back into his thieves, grr, and then, but always being drawn towards it.
Right. Headed towards he knew not where. And then he's just chilling in a dwarfish ruin, and the ring goes past, and he's like, well, that's lucky.
Right? I mean, how, because that's the thing, like, how else did he find them?
Right? It's a big place.
Or he was rescued by the orcs, and the orcs talked to the crows, And the crows were like, they're going down under the mountain right here. And the orcs were like, sick 'em, boy.
Go for it. Yeah, that's another one that I'd love to see some fan fiction on, like the hidden scenes of people getting from here to there. It was after nightfall when they had entered the mines. They had been going for several hours with only brief halts when Gandalf came to his first serious check. Before him stood a wide, dark arch opening into 3 passages. All led in the same general direction, eastwards, but the left-hand passage plunged down while the right hand climbed up, and the middle way seemed to run on smooth and level, but very narrow. I have no memory of this place at all, said Gandalf, standing uncertainly under the arch. He held up his staff in the hope of finding some marks or inscription that might help his choice, but nothing of the kind was to be seen. I am too weary to decide, he said, shaking his head. And I expect that you are all as weary as I am, or wearier. Short legs. Neg, neg, neg. We had better halt here for what is left of the night. You know what I mean. In here it is ever dark, but outside the late moon is riding westward and the middle night has passed. Poor old Bill, said Sam. I wonder where he is. I hope those wolves haven't got him yet. To the left of the great arch they found a stone door. It was half closed, but swung back easily to a gentle thrust. Beyond there seemed to lie a wide chamber cut in the rock. Steady, steady, cried Gandalf as Merry and Pippin pushed forward, glad to find a place where they could rest with at least more feeling of shelter than in the open passage. Steady! You do not know what is inside yet. I will go first. He went in cautiously, and the others filed behind. There, he said, pointing with his staff to the middle of the floor. Before his feet they saw a large round hole, like the mouth of a well. Broken and rusty chains lay at the edge and trailed down into the black pit. Fragments of stone lay near. One of you might have fallen in and still be wondering when you were going to... Oh, that's not Gandalf. I hate it when I do the wrong voice. One of you might have fallen in and still be wondering when you were going to strike the bottom, said Aragorn to Merry. Let the guide go first, while you have one.
Oh, hang on. I have something for this. One moment. I knew this mug was going to come in handy at some point today.
This seems to have been a guard room made for the watching of the 3 passages, said Gimli. Incidentally, hilariously, I was when I'm reading these old shades to the kids, I give Merivale a Scottish accent because there's only so many male English accents I can do in any given scene. Mm-hmm. And Mike was here for one of the readings, and when I did Merivale, he kind of stirred and then stopped, and the next day he was like, yeah, I can do a better Scottish accent than you. I was going to offer, but then I thought that might be unwise, and I was like, good call. You will listen to my crappy Scottish accent, and you will like it. And I feel the same to you.
I don't have a better Scottish accent than you. My Scottish accent's terrible. That's why I made Gimli Coloradan and Boromir extremely Coloradan, because I ran out of accents I can consistently do.
Yeah, we need Billy West up in here, or John DiMaggio. Love John DiMaggio. He's awesome. Oh. There seems to have been a guard room made for the watching of the 3 passages, said Gimli. This hole was plainly a well for the guard's use, covered with a stone lid, but the lid is broken, and we must all take care in the dark. Pippin felt curiously attracted by the well. While the others were unrolling blankets and making beds against the walls of the chamber, as far as possible from the hole in the floor, he crept to the edge and peered over. A chill air seemed to strike his face, rising from invisible depths. Moved by a sudden impulse, he groped for a loose stone and let it drop. He felt his heart beat many times before there was any sound. Then far below, as if the stone had fallen into deep water in some cavernous place, there came a plunk, very distant, but magnified and repeated in the hollow shaft. "What's that?" cried Gandalf. He was relieved when Pippin confessed what he had done, but he was angry, and Pippin could see his eye glinting. "Fool of a Took," he growled. "This is a serious journey, not a hobbit walking party. Throw yourself in next time, and then you will be no further nuisance. Now be quiet." Nothing more was heard for several minutes, but then there came out of the depths faint knocks. Tom tap, tap tom. They stopped, and when the echoes had died away, they were repeated. Tap tom, tom tap, tap tap, tom. They sounded disquietingly like signals of some sort, but after a while the knocking died away and was not heard again. "That was the sound of a hammer, or I have never heard one," said Gimli. "Yes," said Gandalf, "and I do not like it. It may have nothing to do with Peregrine's foolish stone, but probably something has been disturbed that would have been better left quiet. Pray do nothing of the kind again. Let us hope we shall get some rest without further trouble. You, Pippin, you, Pippin, can go on the first watch as a reward," he growled, and he rolled himself in a blanket. Pippin sat miserably by the door in the pitch dark, but he kept on turning round, fearing that some unknown thing would crawl up out of the well. He wished he could cover the hole, if only with a blanket, but he dared not move or go near it, even though Gandalf seemed to be asleep. Actually, Gandalf was awake, though lying still and silent. He was deep in thought, trying to recall every memory of his former journey in the mines, and considering anxiously the next course that he should take. A false turn now might be disastrous. After an hour he rose up and came over to Pippin. "Get into a corner and have a sleep, my lad," he said, in a kindly tone. "You want to sleep, I expect. I cannot get a wink, so I may as well do the watching." "I know what is the matter with me," he muttered as he sat down by the door. "I need smoke. I've not tasted it since the morning before the snowstorm." The last thing that Pippin saw as sleep took him was a dark glimpse of the old wizard huddled on the floor, shielding a glowing chip in his gnarled hands between his knees. The flicker for a moment showed his sharp nose and the puff of smoke. So noise bad, smell of smoke totally fine.
Look, noise bad because Pippin did it. Smell of smoke totally fine because Gandalf did it. This is absolutely a double standard.
Like when Bilbo was found himself alone in the mines up north, and he came to, and he was like, the dwarves are gone, the goblins are gone, everyone's gone, fuck. And he found his first thought was, okay, I need smoke. I'm feeling very disoriented, and I need a pipe. So he found his pipe, and it was unbroken, and he found matches, and he was like, awesome. And then he looked for his tobacco pouch, and it was missing, and he was like, But then the next sentence is, but then he realized that horrible things might come on him out of the dark if they smelled smoke. So probably it was all for the best.
And thus, Bilbo is proved in at least one instance a little smarter than Gandalf.
Just a bit. Of course, Gandalf's more equipped to deal with anything that comes out of the dark at them.
Well, yes, and then again, a huge resounding no.
Oh, what's that a quote from?
Knight's Tale. Were you robbed? Interesting question.
That's
Was
right.
I robbed? Yes, and then again, a huge resounding no.
It's more an
It's more sort of an
involuntary
involuntary vow of poverty.
I love you, Paul Bettany. It was Gandalf who roused them all from sleep. He had sat and watched all alone for about 6 hours and had let the others rest. And in the watches I have made up my mind, he said. I do not like the feel of the middle way, and I do not like the smell of the left-hand way. There is foul air down there, or I am no guide. I shall take the right-hand passage. It is time we began to climb up again. For 8 dark hours, not counting 2 brief halts, they marched on, and they met no danger, and heard nothing, and saw nothing but the faint gleam of the wizard's light, bobbing like a will-o'-the-wisp in front of them. The passage they had chosen wound steadily upwards. As far as they could judge, it went in great mounting curves, and as it rose it grew loftier and wider. There were now no openings to other galleries or tunnels on either side, and the floor was level and sound, without pits or cracks. Evidently they had struck what once had been an important road, and they went forward quicker than they had done on their first march. In this way they advanced some 15 miles, measured in a direct line east, although they must actually have walked 20 miles or more. As the road climbed upwards, Frodo's spirits rose a little, but he still felt oppressed, and still at times he heard, or thought he heard, away behind the company and beyond the fall and patter of their feet, a following footstep that was not an echo.
Footsteps, footsteps.
Footsteps! They had marched as far as the hobbits could endure without a rest, and all were thinking of a place where they could sleep, when suddenly the walls to right and left vanished. They seemed to have passed through some arched doorway into a black and empty space. There was a great draught of warmer air behind them, and before them the darkness was cold on their faces. They halted and crowded anxiously together. Gandalf seemed pleased. I chose the right way, he said. At last we are coming to the habitable parts, and I get not the lower class dwarf dwellings.
Well, actually, I was thinking about this, and maybe what they came in through was like the industrial parts of the city. So it wouldn't have been houses, it would be like warehouses and workshops and shit.
Yeah, mines.
Mm-hmm.
Small mines within the bigger, like, yeah. Yeah, the... I'm trying to think of a modern open-air parallel, like a Motor City.
Maybe? I don't know what that means.
Probably not. Yeah, no, Colorado Springs has this section that's just like car dealerships and nothing else.
Oh yeah, like that.
No one lives there. And it's not pretty.
Right, or like the area around I-25 and like 6th in Denver where it's just all warehouses and yeah, no one lives there, no one hangs out there. It's not a recreational district, it's just warehouses.
Not a beauty spot either.
No.
And I guess that we are not far now from the eastern side, but we are high up, a good deal higher than the Dimrill Gate, unless I am mistaken. From the feeling of the air, we must be in a wide hall. I will now risk a little real light. He raised his staff, and for a brief instant there was a blaze like a flash of lightning. Great shadows sprang up and fled, and for a second they saw a vast roof far above their heads, upheld by many mighty pillars hewn of stone. Before them and on either side stretched a huge empty hall. Its black walls, polished and smooth as glass, flashed and glittered. 3 other entrances they saw, dark black arches, one straight before them eastward and one on either side. Then the light went out. "That is all that I shall venture on for the present," said Gandalf. "There used to be great windows on the mountain side and shafts leading out to the light in the upper reaches of the mines. I think we have reached them now, but it is night outside again, and we cannot tell until morning. If I am right, tomorrow we may actually see the morning peeping in. But in the meanwhile we had better go no further. Let us rest if we can. Things have gone well so far, and the greater part of the dark road is over. But we are not... What?
I said too soon.
But we are not through yet, and it is a long way down to the gates that open on the world." So what would be the purpose of a giant, massive hall upheld by pillars? Is it a gathering place? Is it a marketplace?
I'd say marketplace.
Are the pillars filled with housing? Are they like hollow pillars with mansions inside? That would explain where all the goblins appeared from in the frickin' movie.
I mean, I don't know about that though, because if I was building giant support pillars for my enormous marketplace under the mountain, I would not hollow them out.
No, indeed.
That seems structurally unsound.
Marketplace sounds right. Like, it's a city. It has a lot of things going on.
Yeah, it's the agora.
Yeah.
Marketplace, public center, general place where people do stuff.
Yeah, a place to impress visitors.
Yeah.
With its massiveness. Love to see it inhabited, you know? I'd love to see it populated with dwarves on market day.
Mm-hmm.
The company spent that night in the great cavernous hall, huddled close together in a corner to escape the draught. There seemed to be a steady inflow of chill air through the eastern archway. All about them as they lay hung the darkness, hollow and immense, and they were oppressed by the loneliness and vastness of the dolven halls and endlessly branching stairs and passages.
Help, help, I'm being oppressed.
This is the violence inherent in the system. The wildest imaginings that dark rumor had ever suggested to the hobbits fell altogether short of the actual dread and wonder of Moria. "There must have been a mighty crowd of dwarves here at one time," said Sam, "and every one of them busier than badgers for 500 years to make all this, and most in hard rock, too. What did they do it all for? They didn't live in these darksome holes, surely." "These are not holes," said Gimli. "This is the great realm and city of the Dwarodelf, and of old it was not darksome, but full of light and splendor, as is still remembered in our songs." Song alert. He rose, and standing in the dark, he began to chant in a deep voice while the echoes ran away into the roof.
Not a good plan.
"Ah, the world was young, the mountains green, no stain yet on the moon was seen, no words were laid on stream or stone, when Durin woke and walked alone. He named the nameless hills and dells, he drank from yet untasted wells, etc., etc. Oh, this one's important. He stooped and looked on Mirrormere, and saw a crown of stars appear as gems upon a silver thread above the shadow of his head. Blah, 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 blah. Mighty kings, carven throne, golden roof, silver floor, runes of power on the door, hammer, anvil, barrel, pearl, unwearied, then, etc., etc. Harpers, trumpets, glory, beauty. The world is grey, the mountains old, the forge is fire, is ashen cold. No harp is rung, no hammer falls. The darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his tomb in Moria, in Khazad-dûm. But still the sunken stars appear in dark and windless Mirrormere. There lies his crown in water deep, till Durin wakes again from sleep. I like that, said Sam. I should like to learn it. In Moria, in Khazad-dûm. But it makes the darkness seem heavier, thinking of all those lamps. Are there piles of jewels and gold lying about here still? Gimli was silent. Having sung his song, he would say no more. Piles of jewels, said Gandalf. No. The orcs have often plundered Moria. There is nothing left in the upper halls. And since the dwarves fled, no one dares to seek the shafts and treasuries down in the deep places. They are drowned in water or in a shadow of fear. And what do the dwarves want to come back for? Asked Sam. For Mithril, answered Gandalf. The wealth of Moria was not in gold and jewels, the toys of the dwarves, nor in iron, their servant. Such things they found here, it is true, especially iron. But they did not need to delve for them. All things that they desired they could obtain in traffic. For here alone in the world was found Moria silver, or true silver, as some have called it. Mithril is the elvish name. The dwarves have a name which they do not tell. Its worth is 10 times that of gold, and now it is beyond price, for little is left above ground, and even the orcs dare not delve here for it. The lodes lead away north towards Corathras and down to darkness. The dwarves tell no tale, but even as Mithril was the foundation of their wealth, so also it was their destruction. They delved too greedily and too deep, and disturbed that from which they fled, Durin's bane. Of what they brought to light, the orcs have gathered nearly all and given it in tribute to Sauron, who covets it. So Sauron's got a stockpile of Mithril?
Yeah, I wonder what happens to that after he gets defeated.
Well, Barad-dûr crumbles to dust. Is it left there? Can you go mining for it later? Later in the Fourth Age.
That would be an interesting Fourth Age story. Human or dwarvish or some combination adventurers going to Mordor in search of Sauron's hoard of Mithril.
Right? It should be really interesting because the fact that Mordor is so nasty has to do with the fact that they're breeding armies on it. Volcanic soil is super rich, so it should be a jungle. So by the time they go to look for the Mithril, it could be a jungle up in there.
Well, did we talk about the idea that it's also like super just industrially poisoned? Like the air has lots of cyanide, and like the air and water have cyanide and shit in them.
Yeah, and it would take a long time for that to disperse.
Mm-hmm. Well, not so much that, although it would, but I read this thing that was talking about how hobbits love mushrooms, and it doesn't say that they love only certain types of mushrooms, so maybe hobbits are just kind of immune to poison also.
Right.
And so that's the reason Frodo and Sam can survive in Mordor, is
Where
that
nobody else could,
yeah,
who wasn't do it.
Exactly. So then maybe if you want to get Sauron's Mithril, you have to bring hobbits to like hack their way through this super poisonous toxic jungle that's grown up around Mount Doom and look for the ruins of Barad-dûr.
Right. But how long would it take for those poisons to just kind of dispel? Because the forges of Barad-dûr are constantly pumping pollution into the air. If they just stop, it might not take long. Or it'll all wash down to Lake Nurgle.
Yeah, it depends on the toxin. I mean, different toxins clear at different rates.
This is true.
Some get embedded in the earth, and then the plants will take them up, or they'll wash into the water. Some are airborne. It just really depends.
Yeah, and Mordor's got 3 walls of mountains around it, so it's not, the air isn't going to be subject to normal air currents or anything. I don't think a jet stream would save it. It's probably got a kind of natural whirlpool effect.
Yeah, the weather in Mordor must be super weird.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to think what that would even do, because mountains definitely affect air currents, and like they make their own climates. So if you have 3 walls of them
Yeah.
and a volcano in the middle,
What's it like out east?
huh? Yeah, I wonder.
Mithril, all folk desired it. It could be beaten like copper and polished like glass, and the dwarves could make of it a metal, light and yet harder than tempered steel. Its beauty was like to that of common silver, but the beauty of Mithril did not tarnish or grow dim. The elves dearly loved it, and among many uses they made of it Ithilden, star moon, which you saw upon the doors. Bilbo had a corselet of mithril rings that Thorin gave him. I wonder what has become of it. Gathering dust still in Mishal Delving Matham House, I suppose. What? Cried Gimli, startled out of his silence. A corselet of Moria silver? That was a kingly gift. Yes, said Gandalf. I never told him, but its worth was greater than the value of the whole Shire and everything in it. Frodo said nothing, but he put his hand under his tunic and touched the rings of his mail shirt. He felt staggered to think that he had been walking about with the price of the Shire under his jacket. Had Bilbo known? He felt no doubt that Bilbo knew quite well. It was indeed a kingly gift. But now his thoughts had been carried away from the dark mines, to Rivendell, to Bilbo, and to Bag End in the days when Bilbo was still there. He wished with all his heart that he was back there, and in those days, mowing the lawn or pottering among the flowers, and that he had never heard of Moria, or Mithril, or the ring. A deep silence fell. One by one the others fell asleep. Frodo was on guard. As if it were a breath that came in through unseen doors out of deep places, dread came over him. His hands were cold and his brow damp. He listened. All his mind was given to listening and nothing else for 2 slow hours. But he heard no sound, not even the imagined echo of a footfall. His watch was nearly over, when far off where he guessed that the western archway stood, he fancied that he could see 2 pale points of light, almost like luminous eyes. He started. His head had nodded. I must have nearly fallen asleep on God, he thought. I was on the edge of a dream. He stood up and rubbed his eyes, and remained standing, peering into the dark, until he was relieved by Legolas. When he lay down, he quickly went to sleep, but it seemed to him that the dream went on. He heard whispers and saw the 2 pale points of light approaching, slowly. He woke and found that the others were speaking softly near him, and that a dim light was falling on his face. High up above the eastern archway, through a shaft near the roof, came a long pale gleam, and across the hall through the northern arch light also glimmered, faint and distantly. Frodo sat up. "Good morning," said Gandalf. "For morning it is again at last. I was right, you see. We are high up on the east side of Moria. Before today is over, we ought to find the great gates and see the waters of Miramir lying in the Dimrill Dale before us." "I shall be glad," said Gimli. "I have looked on Moria, and it is very great, but it has become dark and dreadful, and we have found no sign of my kindred. I doubt now that Balin ever came here."
If only that were true.
Right. After they had breakfasted, Gandalf decided to go on again at once. We are tired, but we shall rest better when we are outside, he said. I think that none of us will wish to spend another night in Moria. No, indeed, said Boromir. Which way shall we take? Yonder eastward arch? Maybe, said Gandalf. But I do not know yet exactly where we are. Unless I am quite astray, I guess that we are above and to the north of the great gates, and it may not be easy to find the right road down to them. The eastern arch will probably prove to be the way that we must take, but before we make up our minds, we ought to look about us. Let us go towards that light in the north door. If we could find a window, it would help, but I fear that the light comes only down deep shafts. Following his lead, the company passed under the northern arch. They found themselves in a wide corridor. As they went along it, the glimmer grew stronger, and they saw that it came through a doorway on their right. It was high and flat-topped, and the stone door was still upon its hinges, standing half open. Beyond it was a large square chamber. It was dimly lit, but to their eyes, after so long a time in the dark, it seemed dazzlingly bright, and they blinked as they entered. Their feet disturbed a deep dust upon the floor and stumbled among things lying in the doorway whose shapes they could not at first make out. The chamber was lit by a wide shaft high in the further eastern wall. It slanted upwards, and far above a small square patch of blue sky could be seen. The light of the shaft fell directly on a table in the middle of the room, a single oblong block about 2 feet high, upon which was laid a great slab of white stone. It looks like a tomb, muttered Frodo, and bent forwards with a curious sense of foreboding to look more closely at it. Gandalf came quickly to his side. On the slab runes were deeply graven. Those
right there.
Those right there. These are Daeron's runes, such as were used of old in Moria, said Gandalf. Here is written in the tongues of men and dwarves, Balin, son of Fundin, lord of Moria. He is dead, then, said Frodo. I feared it was so. Gimli cast his hood over his face. And that's the end of the chapter, and we're close enough to the top of the hour, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that'll line up quite nicely.
Cool. I liked Balin.
Yeah.
My favorite character in The Hobbit. He's also, funnily enough, my favorite character in The Sword and the Stone. It's the other place that Balin shows up, and he's one of the raptor birds when the wart becomes a little hawk and spends the night in the mews with the other birds to learn about like hunting bird philosophies. Balin's the only one that's kind to him. Right? He's a sparrowhawk or something. I don't remember because it's been years. Because Sword in the Stone is a kind of messed up book. Well, that one's okay. The rest of the Once and Future King is messed up.
T.H. White was a pretty messed up dude.
Yeah.
I read a couple of years ago. I read H is for Hawk, which is it's a nonfiction. No, it's not a biography of him, but she talks about him a lot. It's a woman who. It's a story about her like going through grieving for her father's death, and at the same time getting into like, what's the word? Hawking. It's not hawking. It's falconry. You know what I mean. Falconry. Getting into falconry and learning how to do that, and she reads his T.H. White's book about it, which is basically a story about him doing absolutely everything wrong and like completely fucking up this poor hawk.
Oh no.
And using it as like a
how not to do it.
Well, no, as this weird psychological substitute for the fact that he was super gay and into BDSM and really uncomfortable with that and never like dealt with it. So he just like externalized it all onto this bird.
Shit.
He was just a really messed up dude.
Yeah, it sucks to be born into a time and place that won't let you be you. I mean, there's a limit to the amount of sadism that any culture can handle, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Nothing good comes of suppressing your true nature, unless your true nature is to murder people and eat them, in which case
Yeah, maybe suppress that.
suppress that. But gay or kinky or weird in other ways, that should be, you suppress that, you just make life worse for everybody.
Yeah.
Never suppress your weird. Within reason.
Within reason. Well, on that note,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go.
Yeah, you get to read the battle. Ha.
Ha.
All right. So on Wednesday, there shall be ass kicking in Moria.
Indeed.
In Moria and Khazad-dûm.
Yes.
I love you.
Love you too.
Have a great rest of your weekend.
You too.
Till we meet again. Cuidado.
Liamas.